So we're on the Nasty Plant Sessions today, talking Japanese knotweed, and I'm with the experts in the field, David Leyland and Richard Podmore from Japanese Knotweed Control in Stockport. Hi guys.
Hi.
Hi Paul.
Good to see you, celebrating 20 years this year, saving us from nasty plants.
We are.
You are. And so today's session, we're just going to chat a little bit about the nastiest plant, is that right? Japanese knotweed.
Yep.
So what's the history of Japanese knotweed? Where's it come from? How's it evolved? And what's it doing today?
The potted history.
Yeah, Richard's potted history of knotweed.
Dave's going to correct me, I would imagine, on some of these. So, brought over in the mid-1800s by a Dutch doctor, and there were, as far as I'm aware, about 8 or 9 plants that were introduced into the UK through Kew Gardens, and only the female of the species was brought over. So we don't have a plant that seeds in the UK. And every single infestation in the whole of the UK comes from those 8 original plants that were introduced.
This is one of the many exotic plants that the Victorians were finding in all these far-off exotic places like Japan and Malaysia and the Far East, and then bringing them back to Kew. So if you go to Kew, you can look at their history and look how they brought all these nasties back to the UK, including Japanese knotweed, and propagating them, not realising the problem they're going to create in the future.
And what if they'd have had a seeded version? Was that turned into like a triffid? Is that just what would have happened then?
They actually have male and female in the US, and it causes a lot more of an issue over there. If we had it over here, then obviously it would be a lot bigger problem than we have now.
Right.
Most of the spread of knotweed in the UK is done by human intervention. So a lot of it is obviously found on brownfield sites, which is obviously where house building is done and commercial work is introduced.
Right.
I mean, the only way the knotweed spreads is by a tiny little fragment, smaller than your fingernail, being taken from the mother plant to another area to spread. So the smallest fragment from the plants being moved from one area to another will start a new infestation. So that could be natural cause. It could be a fox or a deer or whatever picking it up in their hooves and moving further away from where they were originally, spreading knotweed. Or in construction, and the spade of a JCB or a bucket of a JCB, or fencing contractors getting them at the bottom of their spades and moving from one site to another, will potentially spread Japanese knotweed from one area to another quite easily.
It already sounds. I'm already terrified. It gets a lot of bad press, this little nasty plant. Oh, it's not little. So why is it getting so much bad press, and what can it do?
The key thing, well, there's 2 areas to look at. From the ecological perspective, Japanese knotweed outcompetes our natural flora. So particularly on river courses, we see knotweed growing. It actually causes huge amounts of soil erosion because it stops our natural grasses that bind the soil together from growing. So at times of flood or heavy rain, the soil just gets eroded and washed away because it can't compete against Japanese knotweed. From construction, from a domestic point of view, from householders, it can potentially cause issues to structures. So if you build over the top of Japanese knotweed, potentially it can actually come through and damage the foundations or whatever structure you're putting in place. So potentially it can actually damage that by growing. It's extremely strong.
Yeah, knotweed obviously was introduced as a stabiliser for banks and railways and water courses. What Dave's saying is correct. From a construction perspective, when you look at Japanese knotweed, there's this age-old fallacy that it will grow through concrete. It won't actually grow through concrete, but if there's a crack or fissure in the concrete through age or through poor materials being introduced, it will expand that process and make obviously push through the actual areas that are broken. So we've seen it growing in people's living rooms. I've seen it growing through a car park wall. The places that you see it actually growing and spreading are quite phenomenal, really.
So you mentioned about it binding and them using it to bind riverbanks and things like that. So they actually used to plant it. Is that right? So
when the railways and watercourses, canals and railways, obviously they were all hand dug in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And because of that, the civil engineering processes of that time didn't have the same abilities that they've got now. So what they used to do is they used to actually plant Japanese knotweed on the bank, because the root system is so dense that it would stop the bank from slipping in, which is why Network Rail got such a problem with it.
Right. So they actually used to go out there and stick it in the ground, and now we're just trying to take it out of the ground. You guys obviously know an awful lot about Japanese knotweed. You've been around doing it for 20 years, over 20 years, I'm sure. So how did you both get into nasty plants, Dan?
No, I've always had an interest in ecology anyway. And going back 20 years, knotweed was relatively unheard of, but we knew it was going to be an issue. It was an issue, it just wasn't recognised as a problem. So the first 3-4 years of our business, we were going out there and educating people why it was an issue, what the problems it could potentially create, and how we can actually rectify it and mitigate the risk. So yeah, from our perspective, it's a real interest in ecology and the way we can actually help and prevent problems in the future, really.
How about you, Richard?
So my brother is a landscape architect, and he was studying at Sheffield University, and we were sat in the pub having a conversation, and he was talking about this plant that he was having to deal with in his work experience called Japanese knotweed. And it's that long ago that I had to go to Manchester Library to find information about it, which is something that the kids will never understand.
And that's it, and you've never looked back since then?
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got a lot of years and a lot of experiences in Japanese knotweed and sites. So what are your best and worst cases, favourite jobs, just jobs that come to mind? Funny knotweed, if there's such a thing. What comes to mind immediately?
Well, for me, I was thinking about this the other day, actually. We're doing some work in Southern Ireland for a local authority. I won't mention which one it was. But we're doing some work where they'd actually installed a new walkway, a new bridge over a river across from the main city to the university. And where in the middle of the river there's a tiny little island, and they'd asked us to do some knotweed clearance there. So we'd gone across there and we're injecting the knotweed. And it was over a 2-day period. We had helpers there from the council observing what we were doing and giving us a helping hand. Unfortunately, it was absolutely throwing it down with rain for the full 2 days that we were there. And on the second day, the council leader came across and said, "Look, I think you need to move across from this little island because the river was getting higher." And by the time we crossed to the embankment, the actual island that we'd been working on was completely gone under the river. And a couple of days later, we went back to inspect it, and the island had now emerged from the river, and all the knotweed had gone. Everything we'd been treated completely washed away. But there again, it just shows how knotweed spreads so easily in times of flood, particularly on river courses. So yeah, right. It's one of those unusual things. 2 days of wasted work, really. But there we go.
Richard, you must have loads of stories.
Loads. None of them I can tell that are clean. We did a lot of work with a London Borough Council, and we used to have to do assisted visits, and some of the characters that we used to meet were amusing, is probably the nicest way I can put it. I think the nicest part about the job is the fact that everything is so varied. So quite literally, from the top of the Outer Hebrides down to the bottom of Cornwall, and everywhere in between are places that we've worked, and you're very privileged to get into some places that a lot of people don't ever get to go, and that's kind of the most enjoyable part of it for me. So
today's nasty plant then, Japanese knotweed. Remind us again, guys, what do we do if we think we've got it? I mean, what does it look like, this thing, if you could describe it?
Knotweed's got a very distinctive bamboo style cane, which is a green colour with a purple fleck. It'll grow up to 2.5 to 3 metres in height. The leaf itself is like a heart-shaped leaf in a lime green colour, very distinctive. In the summertime, it's got a white flower that forms on top of the plant itself throughout August and September. And then at the end of the growing season, sort of the end of August into September, October time, the plant starts to draw the nutrients back into the root systems, and the plant starts to go into its winter dormant state. So in the winter time, you can see the canes are still there, but I've gone back to a brown woody state. All the nutrients are taken down into the root systems and what we call a rhizome, and the rhizome stores those nutrients until the plant starts to emerge again the following spring. So you get like asparagus tips suddenly emerging from the soil, and it grows incredibly quickly from there onwards. Really, it'll grow up to 1 metre within a matter of weeks. It'll grow incredibly quickly.
So it's a tricky fella.
It is.
So what do I do if I think I've got it?
Don't panic.
Don't panic. and maybe download the app. You've got an app that identifies Japanese knotweed, so I could use that and find out.
Yeah, I mean the app's free to use, free to download, and we'll tell you, give you pictures of Japanese knotweed at different times of the year, different growing seasons. Gives you lots of information on there as well. As Richard said, the key thing is not to panic. We can, if you use a bona fide contractor to go out there and actually do the treatment work for you, that will resolve your problem for you.
Great. JapaneseKnotweedControl.com is the font of all knowledge, Japanese knotweed. I think we'll say that. David Leyland, Richard Podmore from Japanese Knotweed Control. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.